Alright, let's get this show on the road. Alright guys, welcome back to First Impressions. I'm your host Gavin, as per the usual. I forgot to turn my lighting rig on today, but that's okay, I don't really need it. I'm going to a birthday party pretty soon anyways. So, last night, I went out and I saw Barbie, and I thought it deserved a First Impressions video, because it's a very hyped movie. So, welcome back to First Impressions. This is the show where we review things that have come out between 24 and 48 hours ago. Let's get into the Barbie video. Last night was opening night for Barbie, and I think that would have been about maybe 40 hours ago this movie came out, so we're right within that timeline for this series. Anyways, I went to go see it with a bunch of my friends. We got all dressed up for the movie. It was very exciting. Here's the picture of us. As you can see, I am dripping. I got my makeup done. Third time in my life I've ever worn makeup that wasn't stage makeup. I have worn a lot of stage makeup. My expectations going in were quite different than what I walked out with. I walked in expecting just kind of like a little bit of a cash grab, honestly. Just some big names in there. However, I did know that Greta Gerwig was directing, which she's great, so I did expect more merit than your typical cash grab sort of movie. However, this was much better than I expected it to be, even with all the incredible people involved with this, and just how much marketing. I'd like to start by saying that I am definitely not the target audience for this film, and I've tried to be very fair and to try and acknowledge what a target audience would think about this movie, but I may say something that might go against what the interpretation is that you had if you are a member of this movie's target audience, and if I do, that's fair. You can have a different interpretation of me. I'm trying to be fair and really just explore what this movie is all about. Anyways, what I'd like to start with talking about was how fantastic the acting was. The acting was phenomenal across the board. I really liked Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling. Of course, you knew those two were going to be fantastic. These are two of the greatest actors in Hollywood right now, and they were fantastic, of course. America Ferrera, also very. I loved America Ferrera's performance. She might have been, personally, the standout for me. She was great. Sasha, her performance was fine. It got the job done, and of course, it's a child, so I'm not gonna nitpick a child actor. It got the job done. I think Sasha, the actress who played Sasha, I'm not sure her name, I think she has a good career ahead of her. I think this was a good way to kind of show some of the cards that she has in her acting deck, and I'm excited to see what she does next. Oh, Kate McKinnon. Kate McKinnon is an actress I'm very conflicted on because a lot of her performances I just really don't like. There's something about just the way she acts and her acting style, and just some of the material she chooses to be in that I just don't like. She has this very Saturday Night Live-y vibe to her, but in this particular movie, I thought she did a fantastic job. She was really into her character, even if she didn't have a huge role. She did a great job, which I was very pleasantly surprised at how good Kate McKinnon's performance was. One little critique I do have to say, though, is that at the beginning of the movie, for the first 20 minutes of it, the narrator is overdubbing lines constantly and very consistently, and the narrator always had some very funny things to say. She had some snide comments on Midge and some snide comments on the History of Dolls section at the very opening scene, but then she just disappeared. Like a half hour in, she juts in and says one really funny line about Margot Robbie, and you forget that she hasn't been there the last 10 minutes, and you're like, oh yeah, where'd she go? And then she just isn't there the rest of the movie. And it's really weird, and I feel like that was kind of a missed opportunity to not have that narrator in there more. The comedy, I loved the comedy. The jokes, I feel like for the most part, they all landed really well. They landed in a way that jabbed at societal norms and jabbed at people groups and took jabs at things that other movies are afraid to jab at, but I feel like it didn't do it in a negative or condescending way. It took these jabs in a way that anyone could laugh at them, and you don't feel like a bad person for laughing later. They're just silly jokes based on silly little things that it's kind of a fresh breath there, seeing a movie that isn't afraid to take those a little bit more deeper than what is corporately tame and really branch out into these other types of jokes. I'm quite honestly very surprised that Mattel didn't put their foot down over the screenplay, because a lot of times when companies are portrayed in a movie that they have a hand in making, they want it to be portrayed entirely positively, and Mattel took jabs at themselves, which I was very surprised at, especially from the biggest toy maker in the entire world. But I did like the comedy a lot, and it was very nice. Going off those little jabs I was talking about earlier, there's one scene that I loved. It was this scene where the Kens and the Barbies are all sitting on a beach, and the Kens start getting out these various musical instruments, mostly guitars, and singing ridiculous love songs to their fellow Barbies. And what is funny is, the second they pulled out those guitars and started doing that, the 5 people I went with all turned and looked at me, because that is the exact sort of thing I love to do. I love music. Music is one of my biggest passions in the entire world, right up there with video games and movies. And it was so funny, because they all saw me kind of, that scene was kind of poking at me and how I like to play instruments at every chance I get. And honestly, I saw it and I was able to laugh at myself for it. It was a very well done scene that, quite honestly, it might have been my favorite scene in the whole movie. This movie also, though it was a comedy, it came with some very hard-hitting segments, some very personal, not afraid to branch out sort of things. You know, there was, it covers a lot of different topics. It covers a lot of things about society, a lot of things about gender divides, and I think it did all those tastefully, and for the most part it mixed it in pretty good. One thing I will say is that the movie liked to switch back and forth between comedy, and then all of a sudden it was serious. It did this in a way that it sometimes felt slightly jarring. However, the movie in itself was very, very fast-paced, so it didn't feel out of place with the rest of the movie and how fast this movie was. But I will say it was a little bit jarring in a negative way, how it switched back and forth so well. I really liked the look of this film. I am a staunch believer in practical effects whenever it's practical to use them, and it seems that Greta Gerwig agrees, because most of this set was in fact practical and not computer effects. But I really liked looking at this set. It looks like a Barbie playset blown up to real size. I mean, everything, there was so much pink. We can talk about the global paint shortage because this movie used so much damn pink paint. But yeah, I loved the sets. The movie was fun to look at the whole time. And it really set apart from the real world scenes, which were very drab and normal looking. So very pink, very fun, loved the sets. I also loved, one part I particularly loved was the water. It was plastic water, everywhere, which I thought was hilarious for no reason. Let's talk a little bit more or less about the production now. And what really everyone was talking about this movie is people weren't talking as much about the actual performances and set design and production as much as they were the writing and the message, which is what I want to talk about a little bit here. Now, this message has been a little bit controversial, especially among more right-leaning viewers of this movie, but I wanted to dive into that a little bit and give kind of my take and try and be pretty fair with how this message is. One thing this movie does is it's very, very blunt about what its message is. It shoves the message in your face. A lot of times in movies, I don't like when movies do that, when they feel the need to, rather than show their message, do the characters' actions and choices and development, they just tell you, hey, this is our message, and this is what the point is. Do you get it? You get it? We're telling you. And I feel like that's very demeaning to viewers. However, in this movie, they did that, and it worked very well. And I'll get into a little bit more about why that worked, but the message is very, very pressed upon you. You're not meant to figure it out for yourself, that's for sure. I think one of the reasons it worked so well is because it was mixed in with a very fair amount of revealing message through development. For instance, the mom's speech, the mom's kind of rant. You get, and by the way, America Ferrera did a fantastic job with this particular thing. You really feel like she has had to keep this rant, this ball of emotion and pent up frustration inside of her for 20 years, which is of course what her job as an actor is to do. But she does it very well, and she spits it out like this idea that it's been rehearsed, but not by the actor, by the character, which is what you want to do in a scene like this, is make sure that it doesn't look like the actors rehearsed this, it's looked like the characters rehearsed this. And this is what she did. And I think this is a very fair representation of the gender norms in this society. I think it does a very fair job of kind of splitting that up. I also like how the movie kind of establishes how the core idea of Barbie, and the very, very core idea of Barbie is that women should be empowered to take on any job they want. The idea of Barbie is you have all sorts of different types of Barbie, whether that be different hair Barbies, different ethnicity Barbies, different job Barbies, different things that Barbie does, things that Barbie is, different disability Barbies. You have all these different types of Barbie, and I feel like that is the core of Barbie, that teaching young women that they can be any job or path or career they choose to go down. And I feel like they did capture that, especially with that, and they were able to capture that women can choose any career path they want, and they can be hardworking, and they could be these great impacts on society. I feel like what a lot of movies recently have been doing is they've been trying to spread this message, which I believe is a very good thing, but they've been spreading it in a way that kind of makes you think that motherhood is looked down upon and not really seen as an option. But this movie does that very differently. This movie ends with the mom is very happy to be a mother, and she clearly loves her daughter very much. And I feel like this movie does a really good job of instating that it's good to want to go into career, and it's good to want to be this wonderful thing that you want to dream to be. And but really it also says it's okay to want to be a mother, because that is legitimately many women dream to be a stay-at-home mom. And this movie really shows how you could pick career, you could pick stay-at-home mom, you can combine both, and it doesn't leave that motherhood option out, and it in fact encourages all these options, which I think is just great, because the more options that young girls can see themselves having, the more happy they'll be, I think. One little note I want to say about this is this movie was very meta. It was it's of course when you have a scene where fake people go into a real world, it's gonna be meta, but it's also very meta with things like having the discontinued Barbies and having the Barbie commercials and all these, and acknowledging the failed Barbies. For instance, what was her name? Her name was something like Skippy or something. Skipper. Her name was Skipper, and she was the Barbie. Well, I'm not gonna say what she does, but anyways, one little critique about this movie is that I would have liked to have seen Alan's character more, because for most of the movie, when the Kens discover that they can take over, they take over everything. They are controlling and vindictive over all the Barbies, which is obviously paralleling society, blah blah blah. But I feel like it would have been good to show maybe a little bit more of Alan, who Alan is a male character, but I feel like it would have been nice to have had a man character who is supportive of the female side, because while I agree this is a great commentary on many men in our society and our history being vindictive and controlling over women, I feel like it would have also been nice, especially for the younger audiences, considering that there will be children going to see this movie. I think it would have been nice to have kind of shown that there are good men out there, even if there are also bad, vindictive men out there. I think it would have been nice to have seen more Alan in there, to kind of, especially to those younger viewers who are going to see this movie, and kids see movies and they compare it to real life as much as they can. That's just kind of what kids do, they make connections. I think it would have been nice to have more Alan in there to kind of spread that message, you know, that there can be men who are on the side of trying to make things better. I would also like to say that the ending was very unsatisfying. I loved this movie. It was fantastic, 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 funny, 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 hard-hitting, philosophical. But then you get to the ending, and it all feels like it's for nothing. Because you have the fantastic scene with Ruth Handler, creator of Barbie, or at least the actor playing her. But what I felt like the movie was leading to is that the Barbies would realize that they had, in their own right, been slightly vindictive and controlling of the Kens, and kind of been a little bit unfair to them at the beginning of the movie. I feel that would have been the most sense from a writing standpoint, from a logical standpoint, from a moral standpoint, to have the Barbies maybe promise to give the Kens a little bit more grace and show them a little more kindness, despite the Kens obviously being very, very controlling of them for the past 24 hours in the movie, or however long it was they had control. And I feel like that would have been a solid ending to really kind of come to that compromise and be able to acknowledge that society can be healed and society can make those transitions toward being a little bit of a more better place. But the ending is everything goes back to how it was at the beginning, and I feel like the Kens just kind of get gypped. Like they get the short end of the stick and everything, which I understand why the filmmakers would do this. They're trying to show that a lot of times that's what happens to women, is they fight for something and then they don't really make any ground on certain issues. But I feel like for a movie like this, it would have just made more sense to have come to that compromise to try and heal society rather than sending it back to a period that was negative for the Kens. One more thing I'd like to say, it made me smile when they had the reference to Space Odyssey and Matrix. I noticed those right off the bat, of course, because they're extremely famous. But it made me smile. It was hilarious. I also heard there were some Fight Club references in there, which I didn't quite catch. I haven't seen Fight Club, actually, unfortunately. I'd like to. But I didn't catch those Fight Club references, but I'm sure they were in there. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about some other reviews that I've watched and listened to since the movie came out. I'd like to talk about two people. One, of course, most people know him, Moist Critical, Charlie himself, and the other being a little bit less well-known one, that being the Critical Drinker. Because these two people have very similar names, I'll refer to them as Charlie and Drinker. But Charlie is a very respected YouTuber. I feel like he gives decently fair reviews on most of his reviews, so I did agree for the majority with Charlie. So here's Charlie's review. So Charlie's first point is that Ryan Gosling stood out. And I agree with this. I think that Ryan Gosling 100% stood out and did great. Charlie also says that Ryan Gosling took some of the weaker written jokes and made them strong with his great acting. And I'd say that's fair. I think Ryan Gosling is a very, very talented actor, and I think he does have the chops to be able to do this, and I think he probably did in some places. I just wasn't looking for that like Charlie might have been. Charlie also says that for some of the jokes, they didn't land, and his theater went silent for some of the jokes, and there was no reaction. This was obviously just a different experience thing, but I felt that all the jokes that were meant to be jokes did land pretty well, at least for them. At least landed decently and got a chuckle, but there were several times where my theater erupted in laughter. I just didn't get any of those cricket jokes. I felt like all the jokes pretty much at least semi-landed, and there wasn't any complete duds. He also says that Margot Robbie is the only choice for Barbie. 100% agree. Who else would you pick? There's this one very funny line where Barbie is talking about how she's not perfect and complaining about this and being upset. And the narrator pipes in and goes, "Note to the filmmakers, don't cast Margot Robbie if you're trying to give an example of how someone who's not perfect." And I died laughing at that line because Margot Robbie is essentially the Marilyn Monroe of our era, and that was just hilarious. One thing Charlie says is that the Will Ferrell and board directors thing was useless, and that there was no point to them being in the movie. However, I disagree with this. I think that Will Ferrell, the entire point of Will Ferrell's character is to be useless. And I feel like they did a really good job of making it so the CEOs represented this corporate pandering that we've seen in real society many times, where the corporate people kind of talk about how they're doing this for representation and they're doing this for the betterment of society, but they're actually, we all know their answer, and they're all just actually doing it so that they look good. And I feel like they nailed that on the head, and them being useless was hilarious. However, I will say that the only reason they probably cast Will Ferrell for this role is because to get that big money name in there, because Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie are of course big money names, but Will Ferrell is a big money name who's been in the industry for twice as long as the other people have. And they probably put Will Ferrell in there just to get the Gen X viewership, because Will Ferrell is definitely a Gen X targeted comedian actor type. And they probably just wanted to get the Gen X women who grew up playing with Barbie into the theater because, oh my gosh, it's Will Ferrell and a Barbie movie, two things that I love. But maybe I'm reading too much into it. One problem that that Critical touches on a little bit is that it's a mature movie, a more mature movie than you would expect, as I talked about earlier. But it also has a message for children that is intended to be understood by children, and I could see how this could be a problem, because it does create a sort of clash. I will talk about that clash a little later, though. One thing Critical said as kind of a stab at the movie is that in the second half, the word patriarchy is mentioned only about 3,000 times, which is entirely fair. They shove this message down your throat as far as they possibly can without letting you figure the message out for yourself. But personally, I think that it's needed for this movie. I think that it's trying. What it's trying to do is the entire thing is that these Barbies are being played with by children, by particularly girls who are very young, have a very one-dimensional view of the world, and I think that comes across in how the Barbies interact with each other. They have these very one-dimensional, obtuse, very this is how it is sort of speaking mentality, and I think that the message kind of resembles with that. Kids say things how it is, and that's how the Barbie's saying it, and that's how the movie says it. The movie gives its message very in your face, this is what it is, and I think that actually matches pretty well and has some good symbolism. And I feel like they could have had a really good message, but it is, like I said, countered by the ending where everything goes back to normal and you feel a little bit disappointed. Now let's talk a little bit about the Drinker's views. The Drinker's a very odd duck in the movie critic universe, because I do believe that the Drinker really, really loves the cinema. He has a passion for what makes movies great, and what makes acting performances great, and what makes directing great, and what makes set design great, and all these wonderful things. But he also comes across as such an ass sometimes. He has good points sometimes, and he brings up very interesting perspectives. However, he does this in a way that is very extremist, and it just rubs you the wrong way, you know? And so what I'm gonna try and do is try and clear up a couple of things he says, because in this review in particular, he is quite off the mark in a couple places. And I'm gonna try and adapt what he says to what I think, and talk about how we contrast, and a little bit of that. The first thing he says is objectively wrong, that he makes this little joke.
The movie begins with a rip-off homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Now, come on, this is not a rip-off. A rip-off is when you blatantly try and copy someone and get away with it without adding any originality of your own, and you're making like a second-rate product based on an original. This was not a rip-off, this was an homage. An homage is something that's very obvious. Anyone who's seen the original instantly knows, oh my gosh, this is an exact replica of the original. An homage tries to balance the quality of the original and carry it across, but in a new way, so you don't go, this is the exact same footage. And I think this is more of an homage, so to call it a rip-off is quite honestly just cheap. The Critical Drinker also has this strange idea that Ken is Barbie's committed boyfriend, but I don't think this is the case, even though they say that in the movie. Barbie and Ken clearly don't even know what a boyfriend and girlfriend is and what it means to be in a relationship, and they use the title of boyfriend and girlfriend more of a novelty than anything. It's trying to represent the children playing with these toys. Because think about it, 2 6-year-olds playing with Barbies, they're gonna go, wanna be girlfriend, boyfriend, smooch, 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 and that's what they think the extent of a relationship is. And it's trying to replicate that with the Ken and Barbies having the view of a 6-year-old. And I think that is exactly why Ken and Barbie are not truly in a romantic relationship. They confirm this at the end of the movie, when Barbie says she doesn't want to be with Ken multiple times. Very, very obviously. So I think to call Barbie a bad girlfriend is ridiculous, because she did not even want Ken in the first place. He does bring up a valid plot hole later, however, that Barbies that are deformed, arms ripped off, heads crushed, terrible accidents run over by cars, what happens to those Barbies in Barbie Land? And this is a very, very valid plot point, because if marker drawn on Barbies end up being called the weird Barbie, and their physical appearance represents this, what happens to the Barbies who gets all their arms ripped off? I don't know. Another valid point is that in this version of the real world, there's kind of no good, and it's this absolute wasteland of sadness. I'm a little conflicted on this viewpoint, but we do ultimately see some good at the very, very end of the movie. I think this detail of the real world being very black and white bad is sort of on purpose. Again, trying to contrast Barbie Land with the real world and really get that in there. I don't think it tried to present a fair representation of what the real world is like, and I don't think it needed to. I think it created a stronger analogy by not being fair to the real world. He also critiques the musical fight scene where Ken sings his greatest number of all time. I will not tolerate this. If you critique this scene, you'll have to come fight me, and you will not be entitled to financial compensation. He also then talks about the marketing of the movie and how it was rather deceptive. And I would have to partially agree with him on this one. The marketing did kind of make the movie seem like it was a fair movie to take your kids to see, and it was just a movie about Barbies. However, I personally wouldn't recommend this to kids under 12, and yes, I do admit that's what the rating of PG-13 is used for, and that's why it was applied to this movie, but a lot of times when you're watching a trailer, the rating is only on the screen for 1 second, and you don't really get the chance to see it. So think about it, if you're a parent watching this trailer and you mix that rating, you think this might be a good idea to take your kid to this movie, which I don't think it is. I think this is a PG-13 movie, and I think it's fair to say that. This movie is very clearly not directed at kids who are currently playing with Barbie and like Barbie right in this instant. This is clearly a movie directed at all generations of women who are done playing with Barbie and are past that age. And I think the marketing was very unfair to that. And I think that they maybe should have tried to be a little bit more honest about who the target audience of this movie was. Anyways, to sum it up, I had a great time at this movie. I had a great time. I dressed up, I went and saw it, and it gave me so many laughs and a lot to think about, honestly. I was surprised how much this movie made me think. I'd be silly to give this movie anything but an A.
Minus.
I'm just gonna give it an A.
Minus.
Because it was great. I loved it. I had so much fun seeing it. I never got bored. There was no one weak scene that ruined it, and as far as I can think of, it was a ton of fun, and I can't wait to see Oppenheimer, and I'll see you guys in the next video. I have a birthday party to get to. See you in the next one.